Hello, I'm here again with Andy Rice of Sailjuice, and we're doing the second part of our countdown of the top 10 stories of 2020 on sailworld.com and yachtsandyachting.com. Andy, really good to speak to you again.
Mark, thanks for having me back and keen to get into the top five. Now, I see over your shoulder, actually, there's someone who just celebrated their birthday. They turned 48 a few days ago, and that's Yannick Bestaven, I believe the 10th leader of this incredible Vendée Globe that no one seems to be able to run away with. Anyway, exactly the same age as you, exactly the same day. So many happy returns for the other day. And I have to say, both of you are looking very good for being 48 years old.
Oh, thanks for that, Andy. And yeah, I only found out that he had the same birthday as me on the 27th of December when I published the end of day update about the race, and he had his birthday present where the weather systems were going in his favor. So it's yeah, the leader of the race, and at 48 there's hope for me yet.
There is. I mean, we know unfortunately that Alex Thompson has to come back. He hasn't finished his attempt to win the Vendée Globe. He's 46. He's only a couple of years behind you. And anyway, we're going to be talking about people quite a bit older than that in the Vendée Globe in just a moment. So there's plenty of time for you yet.
Thanks. So moving on to our stories, the first number 5 in our countdown was Kevin Escoffier on PRB describing the moment that his boat folded at 90 degrees, the bow snapped clean off, and he had to escape very, very fast onto his life raft. An incredibly scary moment and a rescue that captured the world's interest. Not just sailors, it was everybody really took interest in this story.
Yes, it does. I mean, I never quite know what to think about this when sailing grabs the headlines because somebody nearly died. It's always great to see sailing in the press, but it does concern me sometimes that when we get the most press as a sport is when things go most badly wrong. And I'm sure you've seen that artist's impression of the moment that the boat did fold in half. I mean, it's just horrifying. The first report that I read about him being in trouble when Kevin Escoffier was first reported to need assistance, there was talk about water ingress. I thought maybe there was a bit of water slopping up through a gap in the keel box or something, but not for a moment did I think that the whole of the bow had snapped off. And I'm only laughing now because I know that he managed to be rescued successfully by Jean Le Cam. Yes, we can. The 61-year-old, one of the oldest competitors in the race, sailing one of the older boats, certainly not one of the modern generation foilers. And for me, this whole story is an interesting juxtaposition between these boats being repurposed or in some cases, and then designed for these hydrofoils, which we've seen used to devastating effect in their previous generation in the previous Vendée Globe with Armel Leclerc and Alex Thompson flying around the planet at such high speeds. But the weather has told the Amoca fleet this time, sorry, it's not that easy. This is not, you didn't design these foilers for every situation. And this time round, we're going to give you a Southern Ocean, which is nothing like what they had planned for or expected for. And it's still quite possible for the likes of Jean Le Cam, who, having successfully dropped off Kevin Escoffier back onto dry land, for Jean Le Cam still to win this race as we speak. And, you know, to do so with a boat with straight foils, none of these fancy hydrofoils.
And the rescue itself was a hugely dramatic moment, but an act of incredible seamanship by a 61-year-old sailor in a 60-foot boat in high seas and 800 miles from Cape Town. It's the distances and just the conditions that had to be done in were mind-boggling. So an incredible act. And as you said at the beginning, we can laugh about it now, but it really was a moment of, will he actually survive this incident?
And what lessons will the IMOCA and the wider offshore community learn from it as well? Because so much of the design of these boats is centered around hoping that it's going to be okay and you're going to get around the planet without hitting man-made debris like a 40-foot container that's fallen off the side of a ship, or hitting a whale or a shark, or all the kind of debris. It seems to be like when these boats are being designed, people are sort of just closing their eyes and hoping for the best, because the strikes, the regularity of these strikes is so frequent. Surely there has to be a big rethink in terms of how they approach the design of these boats. I ain't a designer, so I've only thrown the problem at them. I'm not offering any solutions, I'm afraid.
Agreed. I'm not a designer either, but maybe the safety aspects, the tolerances that they put into the design for extreme events such as hitting a UFO, or just the general wear that these boats are subject to as they go around the world, I think it has to be looked at. And when you are presenting these ultra wide foils, the chances of you hitting something increase dramatically, especially since the foil is skimming the surface, whereas of course the keel, most of the time, while not pointing straight down on a swing keeler, there's far less that you're presenting to hit something on the surface, but far more with a foiling boat.
Yeah, that's true. Well, anyway, not quite all's well that ends well, but at least Kevin Escoffier got away with his life from that incredible rescue by Jean Le Cam. And I'm only surprised that story isn't even higher up the list.
And we have to say, for all of the skippers who are still out there in the Vendée Globe, the best of luck for the rest of the race, and let's hope everybody makes it back safely.
Absolutely.
And now moving on to number 4 in our list, one of our regular writers, Dougal Henschel, has written The Greed for Speed. And this really is an epic story of how classes got faster and faster, and at what point people draw the line, and what also that does to participation in sailing, as to whether this search for higher and higher speeds, is this beneficial to sailing from the point of view of a spectator point of view, but is it beneficial for sailing as a whole? And it's a great story that goes around everywhere, and it opens up with a picture of Chesty Bond, the 18-foot skiff, where the wings, well, it's wider than it is long, this boat, and they're out on the trapeze miles away from the boat. An incredible shot, and from a era of the 18-foot skiffs where they then reined it in. So it really is a great read that asks so many questions about where sailing is heading and at the points where it has diverged.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a sort of a right and a wrong answer here. I think the great thing about sailing is it's so diverse. One thing we do know is it is a sport for life. You don't have to hang up your hiking shorts at 35 like you have to hang up your rugby boots or whatever else. So there's always something that you can do. But if you remember the 1990s race for technology in the dinghy world, where suddenly Laser and Topper and RS were all chasing the top of the pyramid, coming out with RS 800s and Laser 5000s and the Boss and a bunch of other boats that the Buzz and things like that have long been forgotten in boat parks around the UK. The manufacturers realized, well, that may be the sexy end of the market, but there's not actually a lot of money to be made because there's not enough nutters to sell these high performance boats to. So if you actually want to increase participation, then you have slower, safer, easier to handle, more accessible boats. And if you take that to its nth degree, you end up with stand-up paddleboarding. which as a lot of sailing clubs have discovered, and as you and I have discussed on our WA webinars over the last couple of years, that the best way, or one of the best ways to increase participation at a sailing club is to invite stand-up paddleboarders in, because there's virtually no skill required. It's easier than falling off a log standing on a stand-up paddleboard. And then on those days when there's a bit of wind and you see these boats zipping past you with very little effort required, just pulling in the sails and off you go, you convert some of those stand-up paddleboarders into sailors. So I think Dougal's take on that is a really fascinating look back through the years about the inevitable pursuit of speed, the greed for speed. I'm one of those people that's always loved the faster end of sailing, and that's what keeps me in the sport. But I equally understand that fairly, things like the go slow solo single-hander that looked like it was going out of fashion a few years back and was going to be consigned to the graveyard of great dinghy designs of the past is going greater than ever. So that's, if you want the sport to succeed in numbers terms, in participation terms, look towards the solo more than the international moth, I would say.
But as you said, again, right at the beginning, one of sailing's great attributes is the diversity that we have. And looking at that lead photo of the 18-foot skiffs, there was a year when I was sailing probably the most opposite three-man boats that it was possible to sail, in an 18-foot skiff and an XOD, and
right,
completely opposite ends of the speed spectrum. But I enjoyed both parts of the sailing. And so it's not something where there is a right answer or a wrong answer. It's just about recognizing which parts are going to attract the participation and which parts are the aspirational side of the sport. So, but the article covers that off, and I think Dougal did have a fascinating take on it all. And so it was really, really good read, and I highly recommend, if anybody's got time, just around this time, just going into the new year, give that article another look.
Yeah, fantastic. And well done, Dougal. He always hits the nail on the head, and he's a great speaker. When I've seen him at the RYA Dinghy show as well, he's so enthusiastic and so engaged, and he knows the history of the sport better than anyone else I've come across.
We've got a load more coming up from Dougal coming in the near future and in 2021. So lots more content from him, and he is an absolute treasure trove when it comes to the history of sailing. And so getting these articles out there, hugely important, so that we can learn from history as well, to see what decisions can be made, and hoping we're not making the mistakes of the past, as sometimes happens in sailing, and well, not just sailing. Now, the next article, going back to the Vendée Globe, this was actually an article about how to follow the start of the 2020-21 Vendée Globe. And it gave the details as to which channels we're going to be covering the start, and also how you could watch it on YouTube as well. And I think this really showed just how much people, especially in this crazy year, were looking forward to a race that they could really follow, and also just how important the Vendée Globe itself has become.
Yeah, and just thinking back to the early days of the breakout of COVID-19, and when we went into lockdown, you and I in the UK and so many other parts of Europe and the rest of the world, the speculation that the Vendée Globe might not even happen because we just didn't know the parameters of this virus and what was going to be possible and what wasn't. And it just seemed unthinkable that the most socially distanced sport that I can think of across any of the sports might not have happened. But fortunately, they found the solution which they came up with, which was to let the race go ahead, all the sailors to operate within a bubble within their own teams, and not to have those hundreds of thousands of people show up at Les Sables d'Olonne for the start, which it must have been like tumbleweed blowing through Les Sables for the start compared with what those sailors have experienced in past years. But at least once they're on their way, it's pretty much like every other Vendée Globe. And the fact that there's so little other sport going on because of all the problems caused by the virus, has surely got to play into the hands of this Vendée Globe. I would expect that it's going to have record viewing figures off the back of this race.
It already has so far. They released the figures as to what they've had, and also the incredible number taking part in the virtual Vendée, where 500,000 sailors taking part in it, which is extraordinary numbers. So yeah, it's being followed by everybody. And yes, it was, from the British point of view, very sad to lose both Alex Thompson and Sam Davies from the race, but we've got Pip Hare still going round, and she's doing some really engaging little videos from on board, and I'm still following it. And yeah, my new favourite, as I've realised, Kevin Escoffier where you've got Yannick Besthaven in the lead, and so yeah, it's
well, as we speak, Mark, because
as we speak, yes.
This is the problem with this Vendée Globe. It's a great problem to have, but I mean, you know, the place changing in this edition of the race has been like no other that I can recall. The race has often been done and dusted in many respects, a disaster apart, by the time they reach the start of the Southern Ocean. But that's just not the case this time. It's so wide open.
While we talk about a race which usually has an incredibly high attrition rate, we've still got 27 boats actually racing, which is an incredible figure.
Yeah, it is. I always think, I just think it's nuts, the rate of attrition in this race. But I guess we shouldn't be that surprised. It seems like there have been more strikes this time round, as we mentioned earlier, than previously. It seems like in the past the biggest risk was your mast falling down. It was problems in the sky that was going to stop you from completing the race. And I think back to Yves Parlier's incredible repair job that he did just off the shore of New Zealand. His carbon mast breaks in two, and he rigs up an oven out of some ice cream boxes and creates just enough heat to epoxy his mast back into one piece. He manages to raise it by himself, single-handed. You have to do everything single-handed in the Vendée, and manages to complete the race. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the stories that come out of this race. But these days, the greater danger seems to be beneath the surface rather than above the surface.
But to have 10 different leaders in the race, this is something Formula One would
absolutely
would bend over backwards for.
Yes, yeah, totally.
But it is proving, yes, not in any way as fast a race as we had in the last edition, but incredibly engaging race, and so good to see in this time when we have very little else going on. And as you say, the perfect social distancing race, as long as you don't need assistance.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I hope Kevin and Jean Le Cam were wearing masks when that rescue took place.
Well, they'd been socially distanced up until that point for at least in quarantine for at least a fortnight. So I think
they were probably
fine. Problem there.
No, I think they were probably fine.
And then moving on to the next story. This is Boat in a Box. The Globe Mini 5.80 is taking off around the world. And this is talking about another brainchild of the sailing legend Don McIntyre and his 5.8 meter yacht, which can be built at home and is something designed so that you can have offshore races on a budget.
So this reminds me of the Dougie Henschel Greed for Speed. This is sort of like having your cake and eating it, this boat. You know, Don McIntyre, he's such a brilliant brain for coming up with ideas that when you hear them, they're so obvious. You think, oh, why didn't I think of that? And this is another example of that. Just like the Golden Globe race was a great reliving of the Robin Knox Johnston era of the solo round the world races, and the way that the rerun of that race captured people's attentions. This is taking the best of the 6.5 minis and producing a slightly toned down version of it, It's taken the spoiler off the back, and it's got, you know, proper tyres on it instead of low profiles. But it will hopefully get you safely across the Atlantic, and so eminently buildable. With I see a comment below the story by Don McIntyre saying already 120 builders had signed up to offer to build this boat for people within about a week of the story going live. So this really has caught people's attention.
It is extraordinary that to come up with an idea where you can literally flat pack a yacht.
And when it's constructed, also to be able to fit it into a 20-foot container.
Absolutely. So a lot of thought has gone into this. And Don McIntyre, he does seem to capture ideas which, instead of saying, this is what I want to design, he seems to be filling that space where people are thinking, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, what a great way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, he is one of the champions of increasing participation in the sport. He should be a regular for anybody to, you know, for world sailing, or anybody that wants to try and ask for or look for ways of increasing participation. He always seems to hit it on the head with his ideas.
And the first race, the aim is in November 2021 with the Globe 5.80 Transat, which starts off somewhere either southern Portugal or Lanzarote, across to Martinique or Antigua. So it should be a good race to start off with this, as long as the boats can get built by this time.
Well, what I find extraordinary is that this is actually number 2 in your list. So this is there's only one story that's higher than this, and we'll find out in a moment. But it looks like it's going to beat, unless it's Vendée Globe in the top spot, it looks like it's going to beat some significant other stories that have gone on in 2020. So it is quite staggering just how much attention this has grabbed.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on to our top story, and there is one event which we know is grabbing the headlines, and you have been working on the Road to Gold with Hamish Wilcox, who has been out in Auckland and working with some rather famous America's Cup sailors. Can you tell me a bit more about Road to Gold, which we briefly touched on in the first episode of our countdown of the top 10 articles?
Yeah, so Hamish is based in Auckland. That's where he lives. That's where he learnt to sail. And he's been coaching Pete Burling and Blair Tuke in the 49er and everything else they've been doing for the last 8 years. And so I've been lucky enough to speak to Hamish over the last number of months, talking about the build-up to the America's Cup. And most recently, in the last month or so, Hamish has been taken on as part of the performance team within Emirates Team New Zealand. So he's got an inside track on that. He plays his cards close to his chest. He's not prepared to tell a scuzzy sailing journalist like me what's really going on inside the camp. But he did voice his observations and his concerns about what he was seeing on the water from the challengers some weeks ago, even before the first racing that we saw. And he saw a clear packing order in terms of the ability of the teams to take off in a certain wind speed. And he had Luna Rossa down as the best of them, the Americans as the next best, and the Brits as the bringing up the rear in terms of who could get out of the water. And I did point out to Hamish, I thought that there was a bit of controversy a few months back where the Kiwis, as holders of the cup, were not releasing wind limits for when the racing was going to happen. I mean, for such a critical number to be withheld from the challengers, how can you design your foils and your whole hull package without knowing the parameters of what you're trying to compete to? I might have it wrong there, because I've not been following the minutiae of the America's Cup that closely. But that was a key piece of information. We now, with the benefit of hindsight, or maybe not, maybe just us armchair experts, I'm sure it's been known for a lot longer than that, but takeoff speed is going to be one of the critical success factors in this America's Cup. I think we know that now. Now, the Brits, I don't even know where to start with them. They've got really fundamental problems. Luna Rossa and the Americans are much more evenly matched, but Hamish's observation is that the Americans seem really well aeroed up. Their aerodynamic package is fantastic, but the boat is maybe a little bit stickier than the Italians, who seem to have an earlier takeoff speed. So there's an interesting trade-off there between the the different design packages. Anyway, you were asking about Road to Gold, so I'm sorry, I've completely gone off at a tangent and got all excited about the America's Cup. Yeah, the Road to Gold, it applies to any campaign, from an optimist campaign up to the America's Cup. It's just about the building blocks, the sequential blocks that you need to put in place to put a world-class campaign together. And it's about, well, the moment I started talking to Hamish about it, I hadn't really heard anything as clearly explained to me. And I just wish I'd had that knowledge when I was trying to put together an Olympic campaign 30 years ago in the 470 and the 49er. So it's been great to catch up with one of my childhood heroes and get it from the horse's mouth as to how you make these campaigns work from the inside.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating, that, and definitely something worth looking at whatever level of campaigning you're doing in sailing. And yes, we are moving on to the America's Cup for number 1 in our countdown of articles on sailworld.com and yachtsandyachting.com. But interestingly, this is not about the racing itself. This was where a kiteboard took on, a foiling kiteboard took on 2 of the America's Cup AC-75s, which were sailing out in Auckland, and shot video from on board where he was giving it a go and seeing if he could actually race against the AC-75s in a straight line. And what is interesting is this really does show 2 of the, well, ultra high cost boats, these AC-75s, using every single piece of technology possible, to a foiling kiteboard with Nick Reeves, who's 17 years old, with something that you can put in the back of your car. And yes, both foilers, but very, very different in concept.
And again, I come back to the Doogie Henschel greed for speed story. It seems like Nick and the other kite foilers have got the best of all worlds here. They've got America's Cup levels of performance for something that in sailing terms costs peanuts. So maybe you can actually have both. Maybe you can have high levels of performance that are open to everybody. So I still think that the skill level required to sail a kite foil is going to put most of us off. It's still going to be seen by most people as only for gods and immortals to be able to take on that kind of challenge. But I do think it's fantastic when simple technology comes along like that and is able to almost match in performance terms all the time, money and effort that goes into producing an America's Cup 75 footer.
Well, as you'll see in the video, in the end, the AC-75s do blast away from the kiteboard and show that they have got really quite a turn of speed. But the kiteboarding itself, foiling kiteboarding, everybody I know who's done it says once you get over those first hurdles, it is a very achievable thing to do. So this attaining these kind of speeds is possible.
What I like about the AC-75s is that a few years ago, or a couple of years ago when the concept was first announced, it just seemed like science fiction. And those memes of lizards running across the water, and how that's what the AC-75 YouTube concept video reminded people of. To actually see these things performing the way that the designers had predicted in computer modeling is quite incredible. And the fact that they're capable of self-rescue as well, it makes me wonder what kind of trickle down might spill out of this America's Cup into the wider world of sailing. And I've heard a rumor that there is already a super yacht in build along the lines of the technology that we're seeing in the ASIVs.
We recently ran the article on it, Super Nicker.
Right.
So, yes, and it is very much along the AC75 lines. So it's going to be very interesting to see that when it hits the water.
Well, I'm amazed that that isn't in the top 10. To me, that is a runaway. That is one of the most exciting things that could happen. The idea that these outlandish AC75s might actually break into the wider world of sailing and potentially transform blue water cruising if it ever gets to that. That's one of the most exciting things that could come out of 2020.
Yeah, the blue water cruising, I think it could become, your passage races could become very short indeed.
Absolutely. So anyway, no surprise, I suppose, that to see America's Cup come out on top. I thought it was going to be a race between the Vendée Globe and the America's Cup, and just amazed and delighted for Don McIntyre that his 5.8 snuck in between the two as your number 2 story for the year.
What once again, as we look through these stories, what I've been over the moon about is just the diversity of the stories, and it covers off everything. Far less dinghy this year, but there has been far less dinghy racing, so I'm not so surprised about that. But just seeing the diversity in the stories really does reflect our sport.
Yeah, well, it's always interesting. I feel like we've been cheated of our mosquito story that we had last year, that sort of off the wall story where you ask yourself, how on earth did that ever break into the top 10? This seems less surprising, the top 10 that we've seen this year.
I think the SP80 is as close as we get to the mosquito, but yeah, the mosquito really was outlandish.
Yeah. Very left field. So it goes to show you can predict what people are going to read most of the time, but not all of the time. And in a sport as diverse as ours, we fully know, Mark, that you can never keep all of the people happy all of the time. But I've certainly enjoyed going through this top 10 with you, and long may that tradition continue.
Well, Andy, I've got to say many thanks indeed for your time again. I'm looking forward. We talk regularly throughout the year, but this end of year catch up, looking at the articles, is one of the highlights, especially at this time. So really enjoyed it. And also to everybody out there, let's all enjoy 2021, and let's hope we can get out on the water and race far more than we have in 2020.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I should just say congratulations. 2020 has been a great year for your websites, just phenomenal number of readers hitting your sites. And so for all the difficulties of this year, a great year for you. And I congratulate you on that, because I know how hard you work for that.
Well, thanks for that. It's a phrase that I'm always using, is we're getting there. And it's something that will always be the case. And it's been a good year for readership. Far less in the way of dinghy racing events, but we have managed to find a lot of content and create a lot of editorial. And yeah, we'll just continue to push forward and hopefully cover far more sailing events in 2021. Many thanks for your time, Andy.
Cheers, Mark.
Take care.